Thomas Mackenzie had built his reputation as carefully as he had built his ranch. At 32, he was known throughout Silver Creek territory as the man who could tame wild horses, negotiate fair deals with neighboring ranchers, and fix anything that broke. What he couldn't do, apparently, was say yes to a woman. The townspeople had given up trying to understand him. Every eligible woman from Silver Creek to the next county over had tried to catch his attention. There was sweet Mary Patterson, the school teacher with golden hair and a gentle smile. She had brought him fresh baked pies every Sunday for 6 months. Thomas thanked her kindly each time, ate the pie with genuine appreciation, but never asked to walk her home from church. Then came Rebecca Harrison, the banker's daughter. She was educated, well-spoken, and came with a substantial dowry that would have doubled Thomas's land holdings. Rebecca made her intentions clear during the summer social, asking Thomas to dance not once, but 3 times. The whole town watched as she practically threw herself at his feet. Thomas danced with her politely, complimented her dress, and then spent the rest of the evening talking to old Pete about cattle prices. Sarah Collins tried a different approach. She was practical, hard-working, and made it known that she wasn't looking for romance, just a good partnership. She told Thomas directly that she needed a husband to help run her late father's general store, and he needed someone to cook and manage his household. It seemed like the perfect arrangement. Thomas listened to her proposal, nodded thoughtfully, and told her he'd think about it. 3 weeks later, he was still thinking. The most persistent was Eleanor Whitman, the preacher's niece who had come from back east. She was beautiful, refined, and determined to civilize the frontier one bachelor at a time. Eleanor made it her personal mission to reform Thomas. She criticized his rough clothes, tried to teach him proper table manners, and suggested he needed a woman's touch to make his ranch house into a proper home. Thomas endured her visits with the patience of a saint, but his answers remained the same polite refusals that had become his trademark. By the time autumn arrived, the women of Silver Creek had developed theories about Thomas Mackenzie's peculiar behavior. Some thought he was secretly pining for a lost love back east. Others whispered that he preferred the company of men, though his friendship with the local saloon girls suggested otherwise. The more romantic souls believed he was waiting for true love to strike like lightning. The truth was simpler and more complicated than any of their theories. Thomas had grown up watching his parents tear each other apart. His father was a gambling man who disappeared for weeks at a time, leaving his mother to manage the farm and raise 5 children alone. When he did return, the house filled with shouting, thrown dishes, and bitter accusations. Thomas learned early that marriage could be a trap that destroyed everything good in a person's life. His mother had died young, worn down by worry and overwork. On her deathbed, she grabbed Thomas's hand with surprising strength. "Don't make my mistakes, son," she whispered. "Don't marry unless you're sure, really sure. A bad marriage will kill everything good in you." Those words had stayed with him through every courtship attempt, every well-meaning suggestion from friends, every lonely night when he wondered if he was making a mistake. He had built a good life alone. His ranch was thriving. He had enough money saved to weather any storm, and he answered to no one. Why risk destroying that for something that might not even exist? The people of Silver Creek had learned to accept Thomas's bachelor ways, though they never stopped hoping. Mrs. Patterson still invited him to Sunday dinner, hoping he might notice one of her other daughters. The preacher still prayed publicly for God to soften Thomas's heart toward matrimony. And every spring, when new families moved to the territory, the women would eye any unmarried daughters speculatively and wonder if this might be the year Thomas Mackenzie finally met his match. What none of them expected was that his match would come from outside their community entirely, riding into town on a paint horse with a rifle across her saddle, and a story that would challenge everything Thomas thought he knew about marriage, partnership, and what it meant to build a life with another person. The Apache woman who would change his life forever was still 3 days' ride away, but her arrival would shake the foundations of everything Thomas had built his carefully ordered world upon. She would ask him questions he had never considered and offer him choices he had never imagined. Most importantly, she would force him to decide whether he truly wanted to live alone or if he was simply afraid to live any other way. But for now, Thomas sat on his porch in the evening light, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, unaware that his quiet, predictable life was about to become anything but quiet. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of changes that would test every belief he held about love, partnership, and what it really meant to build a home with another person. She rode into Silver Creek on a Tuesday morning when the autumn air was crisp and the leaves were turning gold. The woman on the paint horse drew stares, not because she was Apache, though that was unusual enough in their small town, but because of the way she carried herself. She sat straight in the saddle, her dark eyes scanning the street with the alertness of someone who had learned to read danger in every shadow. Her name was Ayanna, which meant eternal blossom in her language, though she told few people this. To most of Silver Creek, she was simply the Apache woman who had come to trade horses and buy supplies. She was in her late 20s with long black hair braided down her back and skin weathered by sun and wind. She wore a mixture of Apache and Mexican clothing, practical and well-made, that spoke of someone who lived between two worlds. Thomas first saw her at Henderson's trading post, where she was conducting business with the kind of quiet efficiency that impressed him despite himself. She spoke perfect English with only a slight accent, negotiating prices for supplies with a sharp mind that clearly understood the value of everything she wanted to buy. When Henderson tried to cheat her on the price of ammunition, she corrected him with facts and figures that left the trader stammering apologies. Most of the townspeople gave her a wide berth, their discomfort obvious. The Apache raids of previous decades had left deep scars on the community, and even though Ayanna was clearly peaceful, old fears died hard. Thomas watched her handle their suspicion with dignity, neither cowering nor challenging, simply conducting her business and preparing to move on. What caught his attention was her horses. She had 3 with her, and they were the finest animals he had seen in years. They moved like dancers, responding to her slightest touch, clearly devoted to her in the way that spoke of careful training and genuine partnership. Thomas knew horses the way some men knew books, and these animals told him that their owner was someone special. "Those are beautiful horses," he said, approaching her as she loaded supplies into her saddlebags. Ayanna looked up at him, her dark eyes measuring. She had noticed him watching her, had seen how he observed her horses rather than staring at her with the mixture of fear and curiosity that marked most of the other townspeople. "They are good animals," she agreed simply, "strong and smart." "Apache bred?" Thomas asked. "Some. Others I traded for, trained myself." She paused, studying his face. "You know horses." "I break them. Got a ranch about 5 miles out." Thomas wasn't sure why he was volunteering this information. "If you're looking for work, I pay fair wages for good horse training." Ayanna finished tying down her supplies before answering. "I do not stay in one place long." "Why not?" It was a simple question, but it seemed to surprise her. Most white people either avoided her entirely or peppered her with crude questions about her background. This man asked why she moved around as if her answer actually mattered to him. "Because staying in one place means depending on the goodwill of neighbors," she said finally, "and goodwill can change like the weather." Thomas nodded, understanding more than she probably expected. "Fair enough. Offer stands if you change your mind." Over the next 3 days, their paths crossed several times. Ayanna was camping by the river outside town, and Thomas found excuses to ride that way. She was always doing something practical, tending her horses, mending tack, or preparing meals with an efficiency that spoke of years of self-reliance. He began stopping to talk, at first about horses and gradually about other things. She had been married, she told him, to an Apache warrior who died in a cavalry raid 3 years earlier. They had no children, which made her position in the tribe complicated. As a widow without sons, she was dependent on the charity of relatives, expected to remarry quickly or become a burden on the community. "So you left," Thomas said. It wasn't a question. "I left." Ayanna stirred the small fire where coffee was brewing. "My husband's brother wanted me to marry him. He was not cruel, but he was not my choice either. I decided I would rather make my own way than live by someone else's decision about what was best for me." Thomas found himself admiring her choice, even as it made him uncomfortable. Here was a woman who had given up security, community, and cultural belonging rather than accept a marriage she didn't want. It was exactly the kind of independence he had built his life around, but hearing it from her made him wonder what he was really afraid of. "Don't you get lonely?" he asked. Ayanna looked at him over the fire, her expression unreadable. "Do you?" The question hit him harder than he expected. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but not lonely enough to marry one of the women in your town who clearly want you to," she observed. Thomas stared at her, surprised. "How do you know about that?" "Small towns talk. The lady at the boarding house was very eager to tell me about the eligible bachelor who refuses all suitors. She seemed to think it was romantic." Ayanna's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "She asked if I was married." "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that I am a widow." Ayanna studied his face. She seemed relieved. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn down. Thomas found himself thinking about the conversation long after he rode home that evening. He had never met a woman who asked him direct questions without trying to flatter or manipulate him into answers. Ayanna seemed genuinely curious about his reasons, not interested in changing his mind. The next day was her last in Silver Creek. Thomas found her breaking camp by the river, her horses already saddled and ready for travel. He dismounted and helped her load the last of her gear, though she clearly didn't need assistance. "Where will you go?" he asked. "South, maybe. There are horse traders in Santa Fe who pay well for good animals." She paused in her work to look at him directly. "Why do you ask?" Thomas realized he didn't have a good answer. "Just curious, I guess." Ayanna nodded slowly, but her eyes stayed on his face. "You know what I think about you, Thomas Mackenzie." "What?" "I think you are not afraid of marriage. I think you are afraid of the wrong marriage." She mounted her horse with fluid grace. "And I think you use your fear as an excuse to avoid finding out what the right marriage might look like." Before Thomas could respond, she had turned her horse toward the road south. But instead of riding away immediately, she pulled up and looked back at him. "There is a question my grandmother used to ask young people before they married," she said. She would ask, "Do you want a wife? Or do you want shelter? Do you want a husband? Or do you want protection? Because if you only want shelter or protection, you can get those things other ways. But if you want a partner, someone to build a real life with, that requires something different." She gathered her reins, preparing to leave. "Think about what you actually want, Thomas Mackenzie, because until you know the answer to that question, it does not matter how many women come to your door." And with that, she rode out of Silver Creek, leaving Thomas standing by the river with more questions than he had ever asked himself about his carefully constructed solitary life. 3 weeks after Ayanna left Silver Creek, Thomas realized he was miserable. Not the comfortable, familiar loneliness he had grown accustomed to, but a restless, aching emptiness that made his ranch house feel like a tomb. He found himself riding to the river where she had camped, looking for traces of her fire, though the autumn rains had long since washed away any evidence of her presence. Her question haunted him. "Do you want a wife? Or do you want shelter?" He had never considered the difference before. but now he couldn't stop thinking about it. All the women who had pursued him had offered shelter in one form or another. Mary Patterson offered the shelter of domestic comfort. Rebecca Harrison offered the shelter of financial security. Sarah Collins offered the shelter of practical partnership. Eleanor Whitman offered the shelter of social respectability, but Ayanna had offered something else entirely. She had offered him the truth about himself, uncomfortable as it was. She had asked him what he actually wanted, not what he thought he should want or what other people expected him to want. And for the first time in his adult life, Thomas found himself genuinely wanting to find out. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. Old Pete came riding hard to his ranch one November morning, his face grim with news. "Apache trouble down south," Pete announced without preamble. "Cavalry's been chasing a band of raiders through the mountains. Word is they're heading this way, might be looking for horses and supplies." Thomas felt his blood run cold. "What kind of Apache? A war party?" "Don't know. Could be young bucks looking to prove themselves, could be families just trying to survive. Either way, the cavalry's been shooting first and asking questions later." Pete spat into the dust. "Heard they shot up a peaceful camp last week. Folks are scared." Thomas saddled his fastest horse immediately. He didn't stop to analyze his decision or question his motives. Ayanna was somewhere south of Silver Creek, alone and vulnerable. If there was fighting in the mountains, she could be caught in the middle through no fault of her own. He rode hard for 2 days, following the trails she had mentioned and asking questions at every trading post and settlement. Most people remembered her, the Apache woman traveling alone with the beautiful horses. Some had helpful information about her direction. Others only suspicious stares when he explained why he was looking for her. He found her on the 3rd day, camped in a hidden canyon that offered protection on 3 sides. She was alone, but he could see that her horses were restless, their ears constantly turning toward sounds only they could hear. Ayanna herself sat with her rifle across her knees, her eyes scanning the rim of the canyon. "You came back," she said when she saw him. There was no surprise in her voice, but something that might have been relief. "There's trouble coming," Thomas said, dismounting quickly. "Cavalry's been fighting with Apache bands south of here. They're not being particular about who they shoot at." Ayanna nodded grimly. "I know. I have been moving north for 4 days, trying to stay ahead of it. But the soldiers are faster. And they know this country, too. Come back to Silver Creek with me," Thomas said without hesitation. "You'll be safe there." "Will I?" Ayanna's voice was dry. "You think your townspeople will welcome an Apache woman when they are afraid of Apache raiders?" Thomas realized she was right. Fear would make the people of Silver Creek dangerous, especially to someone who looked like the enemy. "Then we'll go to my ranch. It's outside town, defensible. You can wait there until this blows over." Ayanna studied his face carefully. "Why would you do this for me?" The question stopped Thomas cold. Why was he doing this? He could have stayed safe at his ranch, could have simply hoped she would survive whatever was coming. Instead, he had ridden hard for 3 days through dangerous country to find a woman he barely knew. "Because," he said slowly, working out the truth as he spoke it, "I spent 3 weeks thinking about what you said, about wanting a wife versus wanting shelter, and I realized something." "What?" "I realized that all my life, I've been thinking about marriage as something that would be done to me, something that would trap me or change me or take away my independence. I never thought about marriage as something I might choose because I wanted to build a life with someone specific." Ayanna was very still, listening. "I want to build a life with you," Thomas continued, the words feeling strange and right in his mouth. "Not because I need shelter or protection or someone to cook my meals. Because I want to know what it would be like to face whatever comes with someone who asks hard questions and tells the truth and doesn't try to make me into someone I'm not." That sounds like a proposal, Ayanna said quietly. It is a proposal, but not the kind you probably expected. What kind is it? Thomas took a deep breath. I'm not offering you shelter or security or a comfortable life. I'm offering you partnership. A real partnership where we both get to choose, every day, to keep building something together. Where neither one of us has to give up who we are to become part of something bigger. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. You know that marrying me will not be easy. Your people will not understand. My people will consider me dead to them. We would be making our own way, without support from either community. I know, Thomas said, but I've been making my own way my whole life anyway. The difference is, I want to make it with you. And if the cavalry comes, if there are Apache raiders, if we are caught between two sides that both might see us as enemies, then we face it together, Thomas said simply. That's what partners do. Ayanna stood slowly, her rifle still in her hands, and walked to where her horses waited. For a moment, Thomas thought she was going to mount up and ride away, leaving him with his proposal hanging in the canyon air. Instead, she turned back to him. My grandmother also used to say that the best marriages are between people who choose each other for who they are, not for what they can provide. She smiled, and it transformed her entire face. I think you are finally ready to choose, Thomas Mackenzie. Is that a yes? That is a yes. But we do this as equals, as partners. I keep my horses, my independence, my right to speak my mind. You keep yours. We build something new together, not a copy of what other people think marriage should be. Thomas felt something loose and warm spreading through his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was a child. Deal. They were married 3 days later by the preacher in Silver Creek, after the Apache troubles had passed and the cavalry had moved on. The ceremony was small, just a few witnesses who were more curious than celebratory. But Thomas didn't care about the townspeople's reaction. He had learned the difference between wanting shelter and wanting partnership. And he had chosen partnership with a woman who challenged him to be better than he had ever imagined he could be. Their life together would not be easy, but it would be real. And for Thomas Mackenzie, who had spent 32 years avoiding the wrong kind of marriage, finding the right kind felt like coming home to a place he had never been before.